The war on terror is over, but the war for talent has just begun. I'm Parag Khanna, and I want to talk to you about the future of our youth. To understand the predicament, the struggles, the challenge, the hopes, and the potential of today's global youth, let's start by looking at demographics. We are approaching an inflection point that we have never seen in our lifetimes. The world population, after having quadrupled over the course of the 20th century, is actually reaching a plateau and may even begin to decline by about 2035 or 2040. That's not what we expected 20 years ago, when we thought that the world population might reach 15 billion people and we might experience a Malthusian crisis. Instead, what's been happening is that as fertility began to decline in the 1970s, we've reached what I call peak humanity. There is still fast-growing population centers around the world. There are places in Africa, South Asia, and so forth. However, even their fertility is declining. Particularly in the northern countries, in the OECD countries, in the developed world, those countries are already at sub-replacement fertility. In fact, many of them are depopulating and would depopulate faster if it were not for immigration. That is one of the great ironies of today's political scene, because the countries that have the strictest migration controls are also the places that most need young people. They have the highest dependency ratios, meaning the number of old people that have to be supported by an ever smaller number of young people. And so I believe that today's xenophobia and populism will eventually give way to a global war for young talent. In many ways, it already has. Let's look a little bit closer at the demographic structure of today's world. Now, normally what we expect is that each generation gives birth to a larger generation behind it. That's how the world population has grown thus far. But look at what's happening today. Generation Z is topped out at just between 1.8 and 1.9 billion people. We expected Generation Alpha to be even larger. But let's look at what's happened over the last 12, 15 years. The global financial crisis represented a baby bust. Fertility started to decline because of economic insecurity. The COVID baby bust is even worse. And as a result, Generation Alpha, today's toddlers and infants and yet unborn until the year 2025, are probably going to be smaller than Generation Z, which therefore becomes the largest generation that will ever have lived. Now, taken together, the world population under the age of 40, today's youth, do represent the majority of the world population. We have a future. But this is the crazy thing, almost out of science fiction. The present is the future, because if today's young people are not having children, they not only dominate the present, but also the future. So the present is the future. Today's youth are therefore more important than ever before. So let's talk about what they want. Because one thing they don't seem to want is to have children. The economic crisis, combined with the COVID crisis, combined with the climate crisis, are three reasons, among others, why young people are more focused on global sustainability and their commitment to a stable environment than to procreation. Young people have lost their mojo. But they have a good reason, according to surveys. They're willing to make sacrifices to protect the planet. And what they believe is that the number one sacrifice they could make is having one more child or having children at all. And they're right about the climate crisis. This is the present distribution of the world population. All 8+ billion of us are a pixel on this map. But look at what happens as climate change accelerates. The places that have the most young people in the world are turning red, becoming less livable. Meanwhile, the countries that have the lowest fertility and even declining populations are becoming more livable over time. There is no greater irony in the entire world today than the mismatch between the geography of people, especially young people, and the geography of climatic stability. And so you can imagine that young people are going to be on the move. And what's motivating them to move? What motivates anyone to move historically? It can be the demographic imbalances and labor shortages, seeking to fill those labor gaps and earn higher wages. It can be political upheaval and crisis, civil wars, refugee flows, and so forth. Economic crises like the financial crisis of 2008, in which people moved away from abandoned industrial areas into other geographies. Technological automation has a similar effect. If you lose your job in a factory or to an algorithm, you go and live somewhere else where you can get a job potentially in the services sector. And then, of course, there's climate change and the pandemic, in which people want to move away from red zones or hot zones towards blue zones or green zones. And if climate change is accelerating, temperatures are rising, and the world is being divided into uninhabitable and habitable zones, well, young people want what all people want, which is the right mix of latitude, altitude, and attitude. Places that are stable politically and stable ecologically. It's perfectly human. We have a fight or flight instinct. And you don't want to fight against nature. You want to look for places that have adequate political stability and food supply, that are sustainable ecologically, with enough fresh water, in which there is good health care, stable employment and jobs, that are friendly towards migrants and newcomers, and that are affordable. So what can we do to help young people move towards such a future and make every place that is still habitable a place that welcomes today's youth so that our civilization can thrive? Well, in the last 30 or so years, we've settled into fairly stable patterns of migration, mostly within regions. People moving around within the former Soviet Union, Asians within Asia, South Asians to the Gulf countries, Europeans within Europe, Latin Americans to North America. But again, think about the complex effects of climate change and other drivers. These regional patterns of movement are not enough to preserve our youth. And young people are very impatient for change. They don't want to wait for their political systems to evolve. They don't want to wait for governments to provide fresh water and to get their climate and ecology stabilized. They're going to move to find better systems. As it is, they're not particularly satisfied even with Western liberal democracies. If you look at each generation over the past century, the level of satisfaction or contentment with politics as usual continues to go down. And it's lowest among the Gen X and millennials, who are completely fed up. For them, patience is not a virtue. Impatience is. Survey after survey tell us that there are three things that youth all over the world identify with. They want connectivity, the right to a mobile phone, internet access, what have you. They believe in mobility, the right to live and to move and to migrate to wherever they want. And of course, the right to sustainability, sustainable habitats, sustainable ecosystems. That is fair. Now, how are they going to pursue that mobility, that dream, that stability that we should afford them in the years ahead? One pathway is education. And one way in which the war for young talent will manifest itself is the battle for young, capable students. In recent decades, the United States has dominated the global war for young academic talent. It's been viewed as a passport, of course, to be able to move from a place with poor educational opportunities to a country where your degree is a pathway towards higher wages, towards a good job, and towards a citizenship in a livable country, in a stable country. But actually, the United States is not necessarily going to dominate that war for talent forever. When you look at the trends, since 9/11, the proportion of globally moving international students has actually begun to decline in terms of the number that the US gets versus the rest of the world. But they have been going to places like Canada and even to Europe. In Canada, not only does your pathway towards citizenship begin as soon as you enter the country, but also it has a high number of full-time jobs being created. In Europe, we're seeing universities switch towards English language degrees and keeping the tuition costs down and even subsidizing education for talented foreigners and issuing blue cards, the European equivalent of green cards, to talent to work in areas where there are shortages, like in the medical systems or the IT sector. And don't forget Asia, the largest source of outbound students. Now, over the last 5 to 10 years, and especially with COVID, more and more Asian students decided to stay home. And the quality of Asian universities has been rising. So you can imagine that many Asian countries and academic institutions actually want to keep them in their own countries. So there will be a war for those talented young people from all across the world, and they will have their choice. Go to North America, go to Europe, go to Asia, or mix and match, because our educational sector is a driver of our economies, and we need the next generation to keep on coming. There are many categories of people who are migrants. Before the pandemic, December 2019, we could look back and say that more people crossed borders in 2019 than any year in human history, 1.5 billion people. And 300 million people almost were categorized as expats, as professionals living outside their country of origin. That includes low-skilled people, such as construction workers or farmers, medium-skilled people, technical specialists, highly skilled professionals who have been zigzagging and living around the world. And more, with remote work, people can be on the move, even live on the move. And countries are competing for them. Before the pandemic, there was about 2 countries that had nomad visas. Today, about 70 countries have them. And of course, many of those countries are affordable. So being an expatriate, living where you want, is not just for the wealthy, it's also for the young. And young people are looking for affordable places with a high quality of lifestyle where they can have a good job, work remotely, and stretch out their savings to remain comfortable. And so you're seeing policies changing, not only nomad visas, but permanent residency and citizenship and so forth. And it's not just the traditional centers. This is happening from Canada to Kazakhstan to Japan. Countries are engaging in the war for young talent. In fact, it's not only about the mobility of people, it's the mobility of everything that enables the mobility of people. I foresee a future in which passports are on apps and the blockchain, and the data that you need is on secure blockchains, and you can much more efficiently apply for a visa or apply for residency in another country. Most countries want the same data when you want to visit either as a tourist or a student or a professional. All of that can be digitized and done so securely. Mobile currencies, cryptocurrencies, and e-wallets, your wallet on your phone, access to your money and your savings anywhere in the world. Membership in co-working spaces, not just in one place, but there are partnerships around the world. Even co-living, where you can move around between different apartments, condos, homes, townhouses, shared dormitories, and experience the world without the burden of ownership. The same applies for car sharing. With Wi-Fi, you can work everywhere. Even your medical records are now in the cloud, and you can get medical services wherever you are. And of course, education, again, remote more than ever, and people clustering, young people gathering in small groups to do seminars together, either with professors in a fixed place or online. You can see that everything is becoming mobile, and therefore we can as well. And maybe this is our survival instinct. By having mobile technology that enables us to thrive anywhere, we can go anywhere, because we're going to need to. Because remember that with climate change, we will no longer be able to force ourselves on the planet. It is changing. It is a complex system. We have to adapt to it. It will not adapt to us. We need a vision. We need an agenda for the future that is focused on creating a better life for our youth. What is this agenda for humanity? It's the following. We must move people to places with resources. We must move technologies to people. And we have to evolve our mindsets and think beyond strict sovereignty towards stewardship of our planet. We need to significantly realign the natural geography of resources, the political geography of borders, the functional geography of infrastructure, and the human geography of us. And if we get that right, we will actually evolve towards a new model of civilization. I call it Civilization 3.0. Civilization 1.0 was, in fact, nomadic. Civilization 2.0 was more industrial and sedentary. Civilization 3.0 needs to be sustainable, and it needs to be mobile, because many of us may well become nomadic again. But that is something that we can engineer, something that we can pre-design so that this next model of civilization is better than the ones before. Thank you very much.